Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations. I'm Beth Temple for Hooked for Life, and in this video we're going to take a closer look at the Looping Ladders Easy Blanket. Now it certainly is easy. You can make this beautiful, densely textured blanket with no tools at all. So click on the link below in the description to get the free pattern, and while you're down there, subscribe to the channel for fresh content weekly on knitting, crocheting, and other yarny stuff. We're going to learn how to make these really interesting ladder stitches and how to work with the EZ-Wool. So let's get started. As is often the case, I'm going to make a slightly smaller sample than the one that you will be making, but follow along with the instructions and you use the math that it suggests for your blanket. So the first thing it tells you to do is count 65 loops for the edging tail to be used later. Place a marker, and they're saying a safety pin because a marker's not going to really fit in there because that's so thick. So we're going to go back and use that yarn later, so that's what that's there for. It also tells you to note that the yarn tail is at the far right and all the loops are facing upward. Although this little guy doesn't want to stay there, that's what I have done. Because we're going to count now, in your case, 63 loops from the marker, I'm pulling 13 because I want a sample that we can see on camera. So in your case, 63, but in mine, 13. So I pulled up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now it says you're going to work left from right, pulling the 64th loop from the working yarn. Remember, working yarn means that's what's attached to the ball, up through the 63rd loop, which is the last loop of the foundation row, from behind to create a knit stitch. So that's a lot of text, but basically all it means is this. I'm going to put my working yarn behind my foundation and just have that up there to keep it out of the way. I'm working from left to right, and to make a knit stitch, I'm just pulling the loop behind it through the loop in front. So after I have pulled the 64th loop through the 63rd to get my row started, it says pull next loop from working yarn up through next loop of foundation row twice. So I'm basically making 2 more knit stitches. So that's 1, 2. So I have 1, 2, 3 stitches in a row. Next it says skip next 2 loops from working yarn, and that says ladder in quotes made. So I'm going to skip 2 loops on the working yarn. That's this guy and this guy. Skip next 2 loops of foundation row. That's this guy and this guy. And then I'm going to pull next loop from working yarn through next loop of foundation row 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I have my 3 knit stitches. I have my loopy guys hanging out here. And I have 3 more knit stitches. Now we're going to repeat from asterisk to end of row and do not turn work. So going back to that asterisk, skip 2 loops on the working yarn. That's 1, 2. Yeah, let's try that. That might lay a little flatter. 1, 2. Skip 2 loops on the foundation. 1, 2. Pull the next one on the working yarn through the next one in the foundation 3 times. So that is the end of my sample. I've come to my safety pin. So this is my yarn for my edging later. So here we go. We have those knit stitches and then the loops hanging out, and then knit stitches, and then the loops hanging out. And we can also show you that on the diagram. This is what it looks like before we do any cutting, which we're going to do later. But you see 1, 2, 3 knit stitches, loops hanging out, knit stitches, loops hanging out. So we're going to do that all the way across. For the second row, now we're working from right to left. Pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through the last stitch worked on previous row. So I had my 3 guys here, 1, 2, 3, so he's my last one. So I'm getting the next loop on the working yarn and I'm pulling it through. And then pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through next stitch twice. So there's 1, 2, skip next 2 loops on working yarn, ladder made, skip next 2 loops from previous row, pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through next stitch 3 times. So it's basically what we did headed in the other direction. So we're going to skip 1, 2 on the working yarn. We're going to skip 1, 2 that are just hanging out here. And then we're going to do 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. So once again, skipping 1, 2 on the working yarn, skip 1, 2 on the piece, 1, 2, 3. And then for the third row, working from left to right, we're doing the same thing, only going in the opposite direction. So here's the last stitch that I made. There's the very next loop on the working yarn, so that's the one I'm going to pull through. 1, 2, 3. Skip 2 up here, 1, 2, skip 2 down here, 1, 2, pull the next guy through the next stitch, 1, 2, 3 times. Okay, repeat that all the way across. Now you can see, now that we have the pieces a little bigger, you can see exactly what you're doing. You barely have to count, because the loopy guys, the ladders, are hanging out all by themselves, and the other stitches look like the knit stitch. So I'm going to keep doing this for a little while so I have a bigger sample to show you. You are going to go as many times as the pattern tells you. There's my 1, 2 that I'm skipping. Here's my 1, 2 that I'm skipping. And then I'm going to pull through each of the last 3 and then head back in the other direction. So once again, it's easiest to do this on a flat surface like a table. I always fuss about making videos because I tend to stitch in my lap, not on a table. But for something like this, it's nice to have the table to maintain the flatness of the work. You may also notice I'm trying desperately not to twist stitches. If you do twist a stitch or here and there, it's not the end of the world. It just looks neater if you don't. 1, 2, 1, 2. And you're going to go ahead and just follow along with the instructions as many times as it tells you. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to take a look at how to create the ladders. 1, 2, 1, 2. So here we are. I have finished my swatch. I have my columns of knit stitches alternating with my columns of loops. And you can see it goes on and on and on. Now I'm going to tell you I cheated and I did not count rows, but you will. You'll count the number of rows that it tells you in the pattern. So it says to repeat the second and third row 28 times, and then the next row as the second row. Do not bind off. So you see my working yarn is still attached. Leave working yarn attached. Thread waste yarn through each stitch of last row to secure, and proceed with looped ladder as follows. So what I'm going to do, I just threaded some random yarn on a big fat tapestry needle or yarn needle, and I'm threading the waste yarn through the stitched loops. And the reason I'm doing this while I do this Jacob's ladder or this ladder stitch that we're about to learn, I don't want this to come undone. So all I'm doing is whatever waste yarn you have laying around, just get it through the loops and leave that up there so that it does not pull apart while you're working. And if it does, all you have to do is pull the waste yarn up and the loop will come right back up. So now we're headed back to the bottom of the swatch. It says looped ladder rows, cut thread at base of each of 2 loops in every ladder to unloop the yarn, being sure to leave the foundation row loops intact. So this is my foundation row. I want to leave them alone. So for all the other instances in which we have these 2 loops right next to each other, which we're going to use to form the ladder, we're going to go between the legs of the loop and cut just the string that's holding them together. Between the legs of the stitch, cut the white, and that's going to give me this big giant loop that we're going to use in a little bit. So I'm going to do this all the way up, remembering to leave the foundation rows intact and to only be cutting between the legs of the stitches. Now, this is going to make the piece spread out in width, but do not panic, because when we do our laddering up, we'll get our width back to the dimension that we wanted it. So I'm going to keep trimming. It's going to take me just a little while. And then we're going to come back and look at how to finish off those ladders. All right, I have gotten all of my ladder loops clipped, and you can see what I mean about how it pulls out in width, but it's going to pull back up, I promise, so we have a nice, neat blanket. So, following along with the instructions, right here after the illustration of the scissors, so we're right here, starting at the first vertical row of ladders and working from bottom to top edge, take first 3 ladders as 1 loop, pull up from behind through first skipped loop from foundation row, then pull up from behind through second skipped loop of foundation row. So I'm going to grab 3 ladders. 1, 2, 3. Now for here and moving forward, if you can't decide which one comes next in which order, if you pull your work apart sideways, you can see they line up in marching order. So here's my 3. I'm going to pull all 3 through the first skipped one of the foundation row, and then I'm going to pull those same 3 through the second skipped loop. And that's what that looks like. So basically one of the skipped ones is sitting on top of the other one, but that gives me my nice neat edge on the bottom. Moving forward, it says asterisk, take the next 3 ladders as 1 loop and pull up from behind through 3 ladder loop from previous row. Repeat from the asterisk to the top edge. So all I'm going to do is grab the next 3 guys, 1, 2, 3, pull them through this big loop that I made with the previous 3 guys. 1, 2, 3. Pull all the way through. 1, 2, 3. Pull all the way through. And I'm going to do this all the way till I get to the top. Oops. See what I see? I made my own mess there. So here's my 3. This is what I'm saying. You sort of pull it out widthwise. I twisted it. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. And once again, if you're not sure which one to pull, spread the work from side to side. It'll tell you what the next one is. So I'm going to do this all the way until I get to the top. And then I'm going to do it on my other ladder over here. And in your case, you'll have more than 2 ladders. You'll have several ladders. So you're going to do this for each column of ladders. And then we're going to take a quick look at how to finish off the top. All right, you can see my big ladder loops next to my regular size loops that I got from doing my regular loop stitching. And I have taken this all the way to the top. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull out my waste yarn. Working from left to right, pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through last stitch worked on previous row. Pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through next stitch twice. One, 2. Pull next 2 loops from working yarn up from behind through the next 3 loop ladder. So here's my 3 ladder loop, and I'm going to pull 2 loops, 1, 2, from the working yarn through here. Now I'm going to keep going. There we go. Pull next loop from working yarn up from behind through next stitch 3 times. So that's 1, 2, 3. And then 2 loops through my 3 ladder loop. 1, 2, 1, 2, there they are. Pull those both through. Okay, again, you'll have many more repeats than I do, but you're going to end the same way I am with those 3 stitches at the end of the row. Do not turn. Now we're going to do the bind off row. Working in same direction as last row, so we're going back to the left hand side. Pull second stitch through first stitch. Pull third stitch through second stitch. Pull fourth stitch through third stitch, and you're going to just do that all the way to the end. Remember, there's 2 in each ladder loop. So here we are at the end. It says cut last loop to create a yarn tail, tie to secure and weave in ends. So here's my last loop. I'm going to cut it the way I cut the other loops. And I know this is cheating a little, but I'm actually going to cut 2 loops because to me it's a little bit easier. Then I'm going to cut it off the working yarn. So now I have this bit of yarn left. I can just pull it through, give it a tight little tug, and weave it in the back. Just so that to tuck the tail out of the way. If you're super worried about it or you think your blanket's going to have a ton of action, you can always sew that down with a needle and thread. But I just tuck it behind the other stitches so that it's not flapping in the breeze. Now we're going to go back to the other side of the blanket. All right, we're back to where it says foundation row edging, so we're back to the very beginning of our work. Working from right to left along the bottom edge, remove stitch marker and pull the 65th loop from the edge of tail up through the first loop of foundation row from behind to create a knit stitch. So we're basically doing down here the same thing we did at the other end, just on the opposite edge. Pull next loop from edging tail up through next loop of foundation row. Continue in this manner to end of row. Do not turn work. So we're going to pull each loop from the working yarn up through the loop. I know this is a tiny bit hard to see because we have all this going on up here. Now when I get to the ladder, remember that there were 2 loops here, one here and one there. So when you're pulling up these loops from the working yarn, you want to make sure that you get one in each loop because you don't want fewer loops in the on the bottom edge than you had on the top edge, because then it would be more narrow and that would not be cool. So we're going to go ahead and pull those loops up, and we are not going to turn. Let's see, so 1, 2, 3, and then when that is finished, you're going to go back and work in the same direction, and you're going to finish the bottom off with an edging the exact same way that you did the top. And we just did that so you know how that looks. Okay, so I'm putting my loops on at the bottom, and then I'm going to pull one through the other, trim that loop or 2 loops at the end depending on your preference, and weave that little tail in, and then you are completely finished. So thank you so much for joining us here for the Looping Ladders Easy Blanket. I'm Mary Beth Temple for Hooked for Life. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for fresh content weekly on knitting, crocheting, and other yarny stuff. And as always, thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.